Let's talk about class. Obviously, we're going to use the class keyword to declare a class. Classes can include properties, functions, constructors, and inner classes. To use a class, we should create an object. So far, it sounds the same as in other languages. Let's see the sample code. Here is a class named myClass, and it has one property and one function. When we use the class, we created an object in the main function. As you can see, in Kotlin, we don't use the new keyword to create an object. That's a little bit of difference from Java. Next is constructors. We can say a constructor is a special function that is called when the object is created. In Kotlin, we have two types of constructors, which are a primary constructor and secondary constructor. A primary constructor is declared in the header of a class. Classes can have only one primary constructor. A primary constructor is not required. So if there are any secondary constructors, a primary constructor can be omitted. As you can see this sample code, there's no primary constructor in the class header. In this case, even though we didn't declare a primary constructor, the compiler will create a default primary constructor which doesn't have any parameters. Next, this has only braces after class name. Even it's very simple, but it is a primary constructor, which is the same as the first one with no parameters. Let's see the next. We use the constructor keyword, but generally we omit this constructor keyword when we declare a primary constructor. Because a primary constructor is in the header, we can't declare its body if we want to add some operations. So in order to do so, we're going to use the init keyword. Let's see the sample code. As you can see, we have a class that has primary constructor with two parameters, name and age. So when we create the object of this class, this init block will be executed. So as we create the user6 object, this init block will print the string. One more thing about primary constructor is we can use the var or val keyword to the primary constructor's parameters. If we use the keywords, we can use the parameters just like a normal member properties. Let's test it out. We have the user class that has a primary constructor with two parameters, and we have the init block for the primary constructor. Let's create an object of this class. It'll be like this, and if we run it, we'll have the result as we expected. That means as we create the object, the arguments set the ID and name values, and the init block prints out the past argument values. As you can see in the init block, we can use the primary constructor's parameters. Then what about from other functions? Let's add a new function and try to use the parameters. As you can see, we got an error, because these parameters are the primary constructor's variable, which means local variables, so that we cannot access local variables from outside the function. However, only for a primary constructor, we can add the var or val keyword to parameters, which changes the local variables to class member variables. So as you can see, the error has gone, and we have no problem to use them in other functions. So we test the second function and run it. As we expected, we have the second function string printed out. Next, let's see the secondary constructors. Secondary constructors are declared with the constructor keyword in a class body. We are able to have multiple secondary constructors with the different parameters. The secondary constructor's parameters can have the var or val keyword. Let's see the first sample code. This class doesn't have any constructor declared, so that compiler will create a default to primary constructor. Next, the second class has a primary constructor declared. Next class has a constructor with the constructor keyword inside the class body, which is a secondary constructor. In this case, because we have the secondary constructor, the compiler won't create a primary constructor, so this class has only one secondary constructor. Of course, as we talked, with the different parameters, we are able to declare multiple secondary constructors. When we call another constructor in the same class from a secondary constructor, we can use this keyword. In Kotlin, if we have a primary constructor and secondary constructors together, each secondary constructor should delegate to the primary constructor. In that case, we use this keyword. Let's see what that means. Here's another class named user1. Let's say we declare a secondary constructor. This should be treated as a secondary constructor. In this case, this class has no primary constructor and has only one secondary constructor. No problem at all. But if we add the primary constructor, we got an error in the secondary constructor. Because if we have a primary constructor and secondary constructor together, then the secondary constructors should delegate to the primary constructor. So let's add this keyword. And because we have parameter in the primary constructor, write the parameter too. Again, if we have a primary constructor and secondary constructors together, each secondary constructor has to delegate to the primary constructor. This is it for class.